Thank you, Alaska Hurley. I'd also like to welcome the Minister to the House and thank him for his time on this issue. Economic partnership agreements are the trade agreements put in place between the European Union and the 76 developing countries in Africa, in the Caribbean and in the Pacific that are jointly known as the ACP countries. Now, 1 out of every 8 people in the world lives in one of these countries, and yet the countries only have 1/50th of the income of the world, 2% of the world's income. So the aim of the agreements that are to be put in place is to promote poverty reduction, sustainable development and the gradual integration of ACP countries into the world economy. So it's vital that we get our mechanisms in place and that we get them, that we make sure that they work properly and correctly if we're to achieve equality across people, across nations and across continents. But it's not clear that under the current regime that this is actually being achieved at all. The EU is intending on signing off a load of new agreements as soon as possible. 35 countries have signed initial draft agreements and the EU wants these agreed by the end of July, and put it in place straight away. But the view of many people is that many changes are needed to these draft documents before they're ready to be signed off. And this is one of the key issues I want to raise here today. I want to ask the Minister, will you support changes to the draft documents to make these more effective and to make sure that the purpose of the trade agreements is achieved? And changes are needed for various reasons. There are worries about things as they currently stand. For instance, the draft agreements don't pass standard development tests, and I'll give you a few examples of this. Firstly, a question as to whether or not they integrate economies with their regional neighbours. Well, the heads of the African states are very concerned about this, and they want a review of these draft documents in front of the African Union before they're signed off in full. Another question is, do the agreements help to develop new industries in the ACP countries? And on this issue, concern has been expressed that not enough is being done to promote economic diversification. Another question is whether or not they provide full access to European markets, and there's concerns that that's not being achieved. And I'll give one example. Because of the exacting standards of the EU, standards that go further than international requirements, we've got a situation, for instance, on the import of goods containing aflatoxins. Aflatoxins cause liver cancer, and goods such as cereals and dried fruit contain these. Now, because of our exacting standards, the import of cereals and dried goods from Africa has reduced by 50%. But statistics show that in the process we've just managed to save probably about 1 life. So the question has to be whether or not these exacting standards are causing more deaths from poverty and from hunger as a result of the economic hardship of the restrictions compared to saving a minimal amount of lives on this continent. Another issue is whether or not the agreements deliver sufficient infrastructure in the ACP countries, and the consensus is that they probably don't go far enough. I had dinner with the Minister of Finance of Niger before the Lisbon summit between Africa and the EU leaders in December, and he expressed concern about the amount of funding that was coming in to develop infrastructure in his country. And it's one way of promoting equality and ensuring poverty reduction is to make sure that the infrastructure within the country is sufficient. So I think more work needs to be done there, and these are just some concerns that are being expressed by people in relation to the draft EPAs. We all want to see the EPAs work for the benefit of the developing world. Public opinion across Europe wants to make it easier for the third world to develop. So we have to make sure that these EPAs do not adversely affect these countries. So I'm just asking, Minister, for a statement on the following. Firstly, will you agree to push for an independent evaluation and impact assessment of these draft agreements before they're finally signed off? Secondly, will you push for the EU to adopt its unilateral preference schemes to make sure that if a country doesn't sign up to these schemes, that they're no worse off? And finally, will you restate firmly here today your commitment to ensure that we hit our target of 0.7% of GDP in aid to the developing world? Gurr Margaret.